A billionaire who never tolerated lateness sat alone at a table meant for two. 17 minutes passed. Just as he stood to leave, a tiny girl ran to him, grabbed his leg, and whispered, "My mommy's really sorry she's late." In that moment, his powerful, perfectly controlled world froze, because this wasn't just a late date. It was the beginning of a family he never knew he needed. Malik Carter never waited for anything in a world that bent to his schedule, where meetings started when he arrived and doors opened before he touched them. Lateness was a language of disrespect. So as the seconds ticked by in the dim glow of the upscale restaurant, irritation tightened in his chest like a familiar knot. 15 minutes late. Then 20. He checked his watch again. Control had shaped his life, built his empire, saved him from disappointment. And yet here he was, sitting alone. Just as Malik began to rise, a small voice, soft but fearless, cut through the hush of crystal glasses and murmured conversations. "Are you Malik? My mom is running late." He looked down, and there she was, a little girl with warm brown eyes and a confidence too big for her tiny frame. No hesitation, no embarrassment, just honesty, standing in front of a stranger as if the world had taught her nothing but trust. "I'm Nia," she added, like it was the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, Malik said nothing. No assistant, no camera, no expectations, just a child in a simple moment of truth. Something inside him, something long buried under ambition and routine, stirred. Then a woman appeared behind her, breathless, eyes filled with apology and relief. "I'm Imani. I'm so sorry. I know being late is disrespectful, but I couldn't leave a man lying on the sidewalk." He'd collapsed. We waited until help arrived. There was no excuse in her voice, only quiet conviction. She hadn't chosen convenience. She had chosen a stranger. And standing there, watching her place a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, Malik felt the strange and unsettling realization that the world he had built, a world measured in profit, power, and precision, had just been challenged by a woman who owned none of it for the first time in years. He didn't care about the time, but he cared about the truth standing in front of him. And for reasons he didn't yet understand, he wanted to know more. What began as an awkward, almost forgotten blind date turned quietly into something Malik had never planned for, something no calendar reminder or assistant could schedule. Their next meeting wasn't at a five-star restaurant. IT was on a worn wooden bench in a small neighborhood park. Imani arrived with Nia's hand wrapped tightly in hers, her expression uncertain, as if expecting Malik to realize he had made a mistake, that he didn't belong in a place with chipped paint on the swings and uneven sidewalks. But Malik simply stood, offered a small nod, and said, "I like it here." He surprised himself when he meant it. There were no white tablecloths or waiting staff dressed in black and white, just birdsong above them and the soft creak of a swing in the distance. Nia ran off, her laughter echoing like music against the stillness of Malik's usually rigid mind. He watched her, then glanced at Imani. "You come here often?" he asked. "Whenever real life feels too heavy," she replied. That answer stayed with him far longer than he expected. Soon, their meetings formed an unspoken rhythm, at a corner table in a quiet cafe that didn't care who Malik Carter was, a dusty, narrow aisle in a little bookstore that smelled like old paper and comfort, that a soft carpet in the children's section of a library, where Nia would tug at Malik's sleeve and demand, "Read me this one." At first, his voice had sounded out of place, stiff between bright picture pages and rhyming words meant for gentle afternoons. But then he relaxed. He read the voices differently. He made silly sound for characters. He let Nia interrupt the story to give her own version of the ending. "Why does the bear always look sad?" she asked one day. "Maybe he's waiting for someone who still believes in him," Malik replied, without thinking. Imani looked up from her book. She didn't say anything, but her eyes softened as she watched the man everyone called cold and untouchable kneeling on the floor, turning pages for her daughter with careful hands, the hands that had signed million-dollar contracts. Now they held children's stories. Slowly, Malik's armor cracked, not from force, but from warmth. He started showing up earlier than they did. Sometimes he'd bring Nia a new book, carefully chosen, stories about brave little girls, dreamers, explorers, and artists. Other times, just a small pastry from the bakery down the street. In oh grand gestures, in oh show. Just thoughtfulness. Imani noticed. Why do you do this? She finally asked one afternoon as sunlight spilled through the library windows, painting gold on the floor around them. Do what? He responded. Care like this. You don't have to keep showing up. Malik stared at the floor for a long moment, because he said slowly, for the first time in my life, showing up doesn't feel like work. That simple truth terrified him more than any business risk ever had. And yet, it also healed him. Weeks turned into months. Autumn leaves replaced summer's green. Jackets replaced t-shirts. Familiarity replaced formality. Malik learned which stories made Nia laugh the most. Imani learned which memories made Malik go silent. The ache of a childhood spent proving himself, the absence of anyone who had ever truly chosen him. What Malik didn't realize was that, in his quiet consistency, he was doing something no one had ever done for Imani and Nia. He was choosing them, again, and again, and again. Not with words, but with presence. Then, one afternoon, Imani walked into the local library and froze in her tracks. Tucked into a gentle corner near the windows was something new. Soft pillows. A small, hand-carved shelf of children's books. A tiny sign with carefully painted letters. And in reading Nook from a friend. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Nia ran toward it, giggling with delight. Mommy, look, it's for us. It's our place. Imani's eyes found Malik standing a few feet away, awkwardly shifting his weight, pretending it was no big deal. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I wanted to, he replied. That was all he said. There was no grand speech, no confession of feelings, no future promise. But in that quiet corner of the world, surrounded by stories and soft light, a truth stood stronger than any words could. He didn't need to say he was staying. His actions already had. And for the first time since Nia's father had walked out of their lives, Imani realized something that made her heart tremble in both fear and hope. This was no longer a date. This was belonging, and it was only just beginning. The first headline appeared at 6:12 a.m. Malik hadn't even finished his morning coffee when his phone began to vibrate against the marble countertop, sharp and relentless. Message after message, call after call. His assistant, his PR manager. Numbers he didn't even recognize, he didn't need to answer. He already knew something was wrong. When he finally looked at the screen, the words hit him harder than any blow he'd ever taken in a boardroom. Tech giant dating a waitress with a child, billionaire slumming it or trying to play savior, romance or charity case. Photographs followed, stolen, blurred, cruelly timed images. Malik kneeling beside Nia in the children's section. Malik smiling at Imani through a cafe window. Malik lifting a book for Nia as she laughed, unaware of the long lens pointed at their small, sacred world, a world that was supposed to be theirs alone at BY midday. It wasn't just gossip sites. IT was everywhere. Opinions poured in from strangers who had never met Imani, never watched how gently she guided her daughter, never witnessed the quiet strength she carried through every hardship. She's using him. He's just bored. That poor child is a prop. Must be nice to jump from poverty to palace. Every comment was a lie, and every lie cut deeper than the last. Imani found out the worst possible way. She walked into her workplace and felt the silence before she even heard the whispers. Heads turned, phone screens tilted, a half-hidden smirk from one table, pity from another. Her coworker pulled her aside, face pale. Imani, it's online. All of it. She didn't want to look, but she did. And when she saw Nia's face, her child's joy frozen in a careless photograph of the entire world to dissect and devour. Something inside her broke. By the time she reached home, reporters were already lingering at the end of the street. A question was shouted from a car window. A camera flashed. Nia gripped her hand tightly. Mommy, why are they taking pictures of me? Imani dropped to her knees and pulled her close, shielding her with her body, with her heart, with the only thing she had left. You're safe, she whispered, even as her world crumbled around her. But she didn't feel safe. She felt exposed. Malik arrived that evening, ignoring the advice of his entire team. You can't go there, his PR manager had warned. This is a media storm. You'll make it worse. He barely heard them. Nothing mattered except one thing, seeing that Amani and Nia were okay. But the moment Amani opened the door, he knew they weren't. Her eyes were distant, guarded. There was pain in them, yes, but also betrayal. You said you could protect us, she said quietly. I didn't know they were watching, he replied, voice raw. If I had any idea they'd bring Nia into this, but they did, she cut in. And now she's not just my daughter anymore. She's entertainment for strangers. She's headlines. She's a joke to people who don't even know her name. Nia stood just behind her, clutching her stuffed animal, feeling the strange tension she didn't understand. This was a world Malik had grown immune to, but Amani had not. And he realized in that moment the cruel truth. He had invited them into his storm without ever meaning to. You live in this chaos, Imani continued. But we don't. I didn't sign up for cameras or opinions or cruel comments about my child. Pain sat heavy in Malik's chest like wet stone. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I only wanted to be with you. And that's the problem, she whispered. Being with you is what hurt us. The words cut deeper than any insult could. Because they were true. By morning, reporters crowded the sidewalks leading to the library. Parents pulled their children close when they saw Nia. Eyes followed Amani everywhere, judging, measuring, comparing her reality to the fantasy they'd spun online. Her safe places weren't safe anymore. The cafe was filled with whispers, the park with stares. Even the library carried a tension that made Nia retreat into herself. And the sweetest thing of all, the I and N reading nook, now felt like a target instead of a sanctuary. You promised we mattered, Imani said when she found Malik sitting there alone one afternoon. He hadn't planned to be discovered. He just needed to sit in the only place that had ever felt like home. You do matter, he replied. Then let us go, she answered, tears finally breaking free. Before the world tears my daughter apart with its attention. He wanted to argue fight protect. But for the first time in his life, Malik Carter realized that love was not measured by how tightly you hold on. Sometimes it is proven by the courage to let go. He nodded once, swallowing everything he wanted to say. If walking away is the only way to keep her safe, his voice cracked, then I will. And just like that, no press conference, no dramatic scene, no goodbye kiss at an airport. Malik walked away from the only place that had ever mattered to him. Not because he stopped loving them, but because loving them meant choosing their peace over his heart. As he stepped back into the world that had once defined him, the world of power and control, something inside him felt hollow. The greatest deal of his life was the one he had just lost. And in a quiet home at the end of the same city, he now ruled again from above. A little girl pressed her cheek to a book and whispered the name she was trying not to forget, even though the world had already decided to move on. For 3 days, the world did what it always did. IT kept spinning. Markets opened. Meetings were held. Contracts were signed in buildings made of steel and glass. Malik Carter's name still carried weight in rooms he no longer stepped into. His empire operated on habits built long before his heart ever learned to soften. But for Malik, time had frozen. NO assistants buzzing at his door. NO conference calls filling the AI. NO schedule telling him who he should be and where he should go next. Only silence. The kind that doesn't just exist in a room, but inside a person. He slept on a couch he hadn't truly used in years, staring at a ceiling that felt unfamiliar, as if he were a guest in a life that no longer belonged to him. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Nia's small hands turning pages, her face scrunched in concentration. He heard Amani's quiet laughter, the sound he didn't even realize had become the rhythm of his days. He had walked away because he loved them. Yet the space they left behind felt heavier than any storm the media could have created on the third night. Malik stood in his kitchen, staring into a refrigerator stocked by someone else's careful planning. Expensive fruit untouched. Gourmet meals vacuum sealed for convenience. That he closed it. And for the first time since childhood, he didn't choose what was easy or what was impressive. He chose what was real. That he pulled on a simple gray hoodie. Jeans. Scuffed sneakers that hadn't seen daylight in a long time. He grabbed a cheap bag of instant ramen from the back of a forgotten cupboard and, on impulse, stopped at a tiny corner store. The kind of place he'd driven past 1,000 times and never seen. They didn't buy anything extravagant, just a couple chocolate bars and bright wrappers. The kind of little girl would stare at in a checkout line. The kind Nia once mentioned wanting to try it at a quiet hour later. Malik stood in front of the door he had last walked away from. His heart pounded harder than it ever had during billion-dollar negotiations. He lifted his hand and knocked on the other side of the door. Imani froze. Nia stopped, coloring, her small fingers hovering in midair as if her heart recognized something her mind hadn't yet caught up to. Another knock, soft, respectful, almost unsure. Imani's first instinct was fear. Not of him, but of what hope does to a heart that has just started learning how to protect itself again. She opened the door slowly, one hand resting on the frame. And there he was, an tailored suit, an driver waiting at the curb, an polished, untouchable CEO, just Malik, a little tired, a little unsure, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I'm not here as a CEO," he said gently. "I'm not here as anything important to the world." He lifted the bag, offering a faint, nervous smile. "I'm just here as someone who wants to be on your couch, not in a boardroom." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Silence didn't feel empty this time. IT felt sacred. Then a tiny voice broke through the stillness. "Did you bring the chocolate?" Nia asked, stepping forward, her eyes scanning the bag, but a soft, breathless laugh escaped Malik's chest. "I did." She grinned, and something in her expression made time collapse into memory. He pulled a neatly folded handkerchief from his pocket, the very one he'd used the first day she'd spilled juice at the cafe. Before he could hand it to her, she reached out and placed it back in his palm. "You forgot this," she said carefully, as if returning a treasure. "And you're not supposed to forget your stuff when you stay." He swallowed hard. "Can you stay this time?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That question, simple, innocent, unguarded, destroyed the final walls Malik had built around himself. Not because it demanded anything, but because it offered everything. Imani felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't a man asking for forgiveness or another chance for romance. It wasn't power knocking at her door. IT was a man asking permission to simply exist in the same space as them again, that be present. "I don't want to bring chaos to your world," he said quietly, his gaze steady but full of something new. "I don't want to be the reason your peace breaks again." But walking away, his voice cracked slightly. "All it did was show me that peace isn't the place where cameras disappear. It's the place where love chooses to stay when it's hard." Tears gathered in Imani's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. "What if it happens again?" she whispered. "What if the world comes crashing back? Then I'll stand in front of it instead of hiding you from it," he replied. "No contracts, no secrets, no those superior acts. Just me, every day, even on the worst ones." He wasn't trying to impress her, he was trying to be honest. And for the first time since this all began, Imani believed him. She stepped aside. Not for the billionaire, but for the man. "Come in," she said softly. Malik crossed the threshold as if entering something sacred. The small apartment looked exactly the same. Worn sofa, scattered crayons, books piled near the tiny reading corner. But it felt different now. IT felt like a new beginning, wearing the skin of the familiar. Nia climbed beside him on the couch before he had the chance to sit. She leaned into his side without hesitation, as if he had never left. "You can sit here permanently," she informed him, patting the cushion. "But you still gotta read." He smiled, holding back emotion that burned behind his eyes. "I think I can handle that," he whispered. Imani watched them from the doorway. For the first time since the chaos started, her heart didn't feel like it was bracing for the next blow. The IT felt steady. That night, there were no grand declarations. No promises of forever whispered into the dark. Just ramen shared at the tiny kitchen table. Quiet laughter. A book read aloud as Nia slowly drifted to sleep in between them. And when Malik finally stood to leave, unsure how far he was allowed to go in this fragile new space, Imani touched his sleeve. "You can stay on the couch," she said. "IT wasn't an invitation to move in. That IT wasn't a VOW. That IT was simply trust. And sometimes, that is the loudest kind of love there is." Malik lay on the same worn cushions for hours, staring at the ceiling yet again. But this time, the silence did not feel empty that IT felt. Full, full of the fragile, beautiful knowledge that life wasn't about being untouched or untouchable. It was about staying, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when the world is watching. And in a small apartment that would never make headlines, something far more powerful than status or wealth began to grow again, quietly, bravely, and exactly where it belonged. Not in the world's spotlight, but on a simple couch, shared by three hearts who had finally chosen each other without fear. The world was quiet that Sunday morning, and oh headlines, and oh cameras, and oh expectations. Just soft light drifting between apartment buildings and the gentle scrape of sidewalk chalk against pavement. Nia sat cross-legged on the concrete outside, her tongue slightly tucked between her teeth as she worked on something important. Colors stained her fingertips. Bright streaks of blue, pink, and yellow painted the dull gray ground into a world only she could see. Malik watched from the steps. Imani leaned against the doorframe, holding 2 mugs of coffee, letting the moment breathe. Nia drew 3 simple stick figures, point one a little taller and the middle point one with long hair on the side, and one small in between them. Then, under it, in careful, slightly crooked letters, she wrote, "My family." Malik felt the word travel through him. Not like sound, but like truth. He had signed billion-dollar deals without feeling a thing. He had closed impossible negotiations with steady hands. But that small sentence, written in chalk by a child who owed him nothing, shook him. He stepped closer and crouched beside her. "Is this us?" he asked softly. Nia nodded without looking up. "Of course. You're here now. That's what family is. People who stay." Something in his chest cracked completely open. There was no boardroom for this moment, and oh perfect timing and oh planning. Only heart. He stood, took a breath, turned to Imani. Then, slowly, deliberately, Malik lowered himself to one knee on the same pavement that carried Nia's drawing, and O-ring gleamed in the sunlight. Just sincerity, just vulnerability, just him. "I don't have a speech prepared," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "And for once in my life, I don't want to make anything sound impressive or perfect." He swallowed. "I don't want to be your rescuer. I don't want to be your billionaire dream. I don't want to promise a life that looks good on paper." He looked at Nia, then back at Imani. "I just want to be here when life is messy, when it's loud, when it's boring, when it's beautiful, and when it's unfair. I want to read stories, fix broken toys, make bad ramen and laugh at it." A tear slipped down his cheek. "Can I stay forever?" For a moment, the world held its breath. Imani stepped closer, kneeling in front of him, hands trembling as she cupped his face. Not like she was claiming something, but like she was protecting something precious. "You already stayed," she whispered, her own tears falling. "When it was hardest, when walking away would have been easier. You showed up as a man, not a title." She pressed her forehead to his. "That's the only forever I believe in." Then she smiled, a smile built from relief, from hope, from certainty. Yes, it wasn't shouted, it wasn't announced, but it rang louder than any applause ever could. Nia gasped dramatically. "Wait, does this mean I get 2 people to boss around now?" Malik laughed through his tears. "That seems very likely." She ran forward and threw her arms around both of them, wrapping them into a tangled, imperfect, beautiful hug. Point 3 hearts, point 3 stories, point 3 lonely paths that had somehow found the same destination. Family, not born of blood or papers or rings, but of choice. And in the center of the pavement, beneath fading chalk letters and soft morning sun, Malik Carter realized something at last. The greatest success of his life wasn't built in glass towers. It was drawn in color by a little girl and written, forever in the simplest words he had ever known, "My family." They walk away hand in hand. No promises spoken, no contracts signed, no spotlight needed, just 3 shadows on a path, 3 hearts joined by choice, because real love doesn't arrive loud. Sometimes it just shows up and stays.